A colossal stone finger points toward a sky it was never meant to touch. Across our world, the bones of half-built dreams lie silent in the desert, the jungle, and the hills. These are the unfinished megastructures of antiquity, and they are not failures. They are frozen screams, capturing the precise moment when a civilization's grandest ambition met an immovable force. By the end of this journey, you will understand the hidden forces that toppled kings and halted history's greatest building projects. What could make an emperor walk away from his own tomb? How does a single crack in stone rewrite the destiny of a nation? These stone puzzles hold the answers. They reveal that the true story of the ancient world is not written in its triumphs, but in what was left forever undone. What do you believe is the greatest threat to a grand vision? Their ambition was not measured in feet or meters, but in lifetimes. To conceive of a pyramid, a temple complex, or a monumental tomb was to make a declaration against time itself. A ruler was not just building a structure, they were attempting to forge a permanent mark on the world, a statement so vast it would outlast dynasties and outshine the sun. This required a staggering mobilization of an entire civilization. Think of the logistics alone, quarrying million-ton blocks of stone without iron tools, transporting them across miles of desert or river without the wheel, feeding and housing thousands of skilled laborers, artisans, and engineers for decades, sometimes for generations. The entire economy of a kingdom would pivot to serve this single, soaring goal. Grain stores fed the workers, gold mines paid for exotic materials, and every able body became part of a human machine dedicated to a dream set in stone. This vulnerability is the key to understanding their stories. When a society pours so much of its wealth, its labor, and its very identity into one project, that project becomes a mirror of the society itself. Any crack in the foundation of the kingdom, a poor harvest, a shift in leadership, a distant conflict is instantly magnified in the unfinished walls of the monument. The scale of the ambition made the endeavor magnificent, but it also made it perilously fragile. These stones were not just being stacked, they were a civilization holding its breath, betting its future on a symbol meant to last for eternity. So when work suddenly stopped, when the chisels fell silent and the ramps were left to crumble, it was never a simple matter of running out of bricks. It was a seismic event, a silent scream captured in granite and limestone. What could possibly be powerful enough to break a promise made to the gods and to history itself? The answer often lies not in the stone, but in the shadow of the throne. The most direct answer is sometimes written in the stone itself. Deep in the sun-scorched granite quarries of Aswan in southern Egypt lies a monument that was never raised. It is known simply as the Unfinished Obelisk, and it offers a perfect, almost clinical snapshot of a megastructure's sudden death. This was intended to be a titan, a single shaft of red granite stretching 137 feet into the sky and weighing an estimated 1,200 tons. To stand it upright would have been a feat of engineering that pushed the boundaries of the possible, but it never left its bed. You can walk around it today and see the entire process frozen, like a workshop abandoned at the end of a shift. The workers first carved a deep trench around the intended shape, painstakingly pounding with stone tools to free the obelisk from the living rock below. You can see the tool marks, the channels where they worked, and even the spaces where wooden wedges would have been soaked to expand and crack the stone free. Then the disaster. A deep, fatal flaw appeared in the granite, a massive crack running through the length of the monolith. In that moment, decades of labor, the pride of a pharaoh, and an incalculable investment in human effort were rendered worthless. The stone was flawed, and so the dream was abandoned right where it lay. This is a story with a startlingly clear cause. It was not a war, not a fading empire, but a single, hidden weakness in the earth that brought everything to a halt. The unfinished obelisk stands as a stark reminder that for all their divine authority, the ancient builders were forever at the mercy of the material world. One crack was all it took to silence the quarry forever. Yet, this kind of clean, physical explanation is a rarity. More often, the reasons for abandonment are woven into the fabric of human society, where pressures build slowly and invisibly until they become unbearable. A crack in stone is a simple, physical end, but a crack in a dynasty is something far more complex and far more final. To see this, we travel from the quarries of Aswan to the necropolis at Abusir, a royal burial ground for the pharaohs of Egypt's 5th dynasty. Here, the sands hold the remains of a pyramid that tells a different kind of story. It is the tomb of Pharaoh Neferefre, and it is not a monument interrupted, but a promise abruptly revoked. Where a finished pyramid would have risen to a sharp point against the horizon, there is only a low, square mass of limestone blocks, like the foundation of a building that vanished before the walls could be raised. The inner chambers were hastily finished, but the grand superstructure, the millions of tons of additional casing stones that would have formed the iconic shape, were never even begun. This stark, flat-topped structure is a ghost of a pyramid, and its unfinished state is a direct reflection of a political reality. Neferefre was a young man when he ascended the throne, and his reign was unexpectedly brief. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, the pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a machine for resurrection, a sacred ramp to launch the pharaoh's soul to the stars. Its construction was an act of state that began the moment a new king took power. But when that king passed from the world after only a short time, the entire theological and bureaucratic engine behind his pyramid ground to a halt. His successor, likely a brother, faced a choice: pour the kingdom's remaining resources into completing the tomb of the dead king, or redirect all that labor and wealth toward building his own gateway to eternity. The decision, from a political and practical standpoint, was inevitable. Neferefre's complex was sealed as it was, a functional but humble resting place, and the workforce moved on to a new project for a living pharaoh. This case reveals a brutal truth about these ancient megastructures. They were not public works in a modern sense. They were extensions of a single individual's divine mandate. When that individual fell, the project could collapse with them, leaving behind a skeletal monument that speaks volumes about the fragility of power and the fleeting nature of royal favor. The silence at Abusir is not the silence of a broken tool, but the silence of a court that has already turned its gaze to a new sun. But sometimes the force that stops construction is not a crack in the stone or a passing king, but a deliberate, chilling act of erasure. For this, we must enter the breathtaking valley of Deir el-Bahri, where a monument of such elegance and power was carved directly into the golden cliffs. This is the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, a queen who declared herself pharaoh. Its design was a radical departure from the sloping pyramids of old. 3 sweeping, colonnaded terraces rose like giant steps toward the heavens, connected by long ramps, a harmonious blend of architecture and natural landscape that projected not brute force but calculated, serene authority. It was a statement in limestone, a declaration that her rule was legitimate, stable, and blessed by the gods. For 2 decades, her reign was prosperous and peaceful, and her temple grew, a testament to a thriving state. Then everything changed. After her passing, her stepson and co-ruler, Thutmose III, came into his full power, a military genius who would expand the empire further than ever before. He appears to have viewed Hatshepsut's unprecedented reign as a dangerous aberration, a breach in the divine order that only men should hold the throne. What followed was not mere neglect, but a systematic campaign known as Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory, official king lists were revised to omit her. Her statues were toppled, their faces meticulously chiseled away, and crucially, work on her magnificent temple complex, likely still adding final shrines and decorations, was ordered to halt. Stonemasons who once carved her likeness were now tasked with defacing it. This was incompletion as a weapon. The unfinished sections of her temple became physical proof of a new political reality, a powerful ideology rewriting the past by literally breaking it. The silence here is not one of accident or shortage, but of intentional silencing. It shows us that a megastructure could be left unfinished not because a civilization lacked the means, but because a successor possessed the will to unravel a legacy, leaving the stones themselves to bear witness to a conflict that reshaped history. Yet even a deliberate act of silencing leaves a clear record in the stone. The evidence is stark, a monument defaced, but what happens when a project simply runs out of time, not in a sudden collapse, but in a slow, quiet fading, like a breath held for too long? To witness this, we must step into the greatest room ever built by human hands. The Great Hypostyle Hall in the temple complex of Karnak is not unfinished in the way we have seen. Its 134 colossal columns stand complete, a petrified forest of stone holding up a ceiling so high it once swallowed the light. The architecture is finished, a testament to the overwhelming power of the New Kingdom pharaohs who commissioned it. But if you look closer at the very skin of these giant pillars, you will see a different story written in sunlight and shadow. It is a story of gradual decline, told in 3 distinct chapters of craftsmanship. Some columns are covered in exquisite raised relief, where the figures of gods and pharaohs stand out from the stone, crisp and deep, every hieroglyph a masterpiece. Right beside them, other columns show only the preliminary stages. Here, you see the sketched outlines of the same scenes, carefully painted onto the smooth stone by master artists, a detailed blueprint waiting for the sculptor's chisel. And then there are the columns that are simply blank, vast, smooth expanses of sandstone that were never touched by paint or tool. This hall is a frozen moment in a centuries-long artistic process. It shows us that the grand vision was not abandoned, but it was gradually starved. The manpower, the skilled artisans, the sheer economic fuel needed to transform every inch of this cavernous space into a carved divine narrative. It simply could not be sustained. Perhaps a later pharaoh's resources were diverted to foreign wars. Maybe the religious focus shifted to other, newer temples. The work slowed from a sprint to a walk to a standstill. The Hypostyle Hall thus becomes a unique historical clock. The fully carved columns represent the peak of imperial power and prosperity. The painted outlines show the moment that power began to wane, when planning continued but execution faltered. The blank columns are the final, silent admission that the age of such monumental decoration had passed. Here, incompletion is not a single event, but a slow fade to gray, proving that even the mightiest empires have a limit to their endurance, and that limit is often etched unfinished on the walls of their greatest buildings. Far from the Nile, in the stark desert of modern Sudan, a different forest of stone rises from the sand. This is Meroë, the southern heart of the ancient kingdom of Kush, and here the pyramids are not lonely giants but a crowded community. Over 200 of them stand in clusters, the tombs of Kushite kings and queens. Yet a closer look reveals a quiet, collective story of fading grandeur. While earlier Kushite pyramids, like those at Nuri, are steep and imposing, many at Meroë have a distinctly different profile. They appear truncated, almost stunted, with angles that are less sharp and summits that seem abruptly finished. The difference is not in the vision, but in the execution. Archaeologists note that the construction techniques changed over the centuries here. The cores of later pyramids were often filled not with precisely fitted stone blocks, but with rubble and gravel, then faced with a smoother casing. This was a shortcut, a method that used less skilled labor and far less of the kingdom's most precious resource, time. The elegant, demanding standard of the past was giving way to necessity. This gradual shift speaks to a slow, pervasive pressure, the quiet strain of economic or cultural change. The kingdom of Kush was a formidable power, controlling trade routes and clashing with empires, but maintaining such a relentless pace of monumental construction across generations is a colossal drain on any society. Perhaps the wealth from iron production and trade began to dwindle. Maybe prolonged conflicts or shifts in the Nile's behavior strained agricultural yields, pulling resources away from the sacred duty of tomb building. The will to honor rulers with pyramids never vanished, but the means to do so in the old, impeccable way slowly eroded. The Pyramids of Meroe, therefore, are not frozen by a single disaster, but by a gradual dimming. They show a civilization trying to uphold a glorious tradition, even as the foundation of that tradition was subtly shifting beneath them. Each slightly rougher pyramid, each more hastily assembled core, is a stone ledger entry recording a slow retreat from a peak of power. It is a reminder that a megastructure's end can come not with a bang, but with a sigh, as the collective energy of a culture gently dissipates across the sands of time. A world away from the desert pyramids in the green hills of northern Greece, a different kind of power was being carved from the earth. At Vergina, ancient Aigai, the royal capital of Macedon, the foundations of a palace were laid that would redefine ambition in the classical world. This was not a tomb for the afterlife, but a stage for the living, a sprawling complex of courtyards, grand halls, and intricate mosaics designed to proclaim the sophistication and might of the Macedonian kings. Its scale was staggering, planned to be the largest building in all of mainland Greece, a bold declaration that the periphery was now the center. The architecture itself was a revolution, blending traditional Greek elements with bold new designs, featuring vast colonnades and advanced hydraulic systems for fountains and baths. This palace was meant to be the beating heart of a rising empire, a permanent home for a dynasty that believed its moment had finally arrived. Then, in the year 336 before Common Era, at the very height of his power, King Philip II was assassinated during a public celebration. The chisels fell silent. The grand vision for the palace at Aigai appears to have halted, frozen in a state of near completion. While some work may have continued fitfully, the driving force behind it was gone, and a far greater force was unleashed in his place. Philip's son, Alexander, inherited not just a kingdom, but a supremely battle-hardened army and a singular, consuming purpose: conquest on a scale the world had never seen. All the resources, the artisans, the engineers, and the treasury that might have finished his father's palace were now funneled into an endless campaign eastward. Why perfect a home in Macedon when the goal was to possess the entire world? Alexander's own breathtakingly short life and the decades of war that followed his death meant that the palace, like so much of the domestic world he left behind, was consigned to a permanent state of potential. It stands as a profound lesson in redirected destiny. Here, a megastructure was left not for lack of skill or wealth, but because the very definition of greatness had changed overnight. The palace was a monument to consolidated power, but Alexander's empire was a monument to motion itself. The energy required to build a permanent home was instead spent on perpetual expansion, leaving the foundations at Vergina as a ghost of the kingdom that was, overshadowed by the legend of the empire that could never be fully held. The ambition of a single ruler could be extinguished, but what happens when the dream itself becomes immortal? On the sun-drenched coast of ancient Ionia, in what is now Turkey, a sacred site held a prophecy so powerful it demanded a home of impossible scale. This was the oracle of Apollo at Didyma, and its temple was designed not just to impress but to utterly dwarf the human spirit. Its foundations alone covered an area larger than a modern football field. It was planned to be surrounded by not one, but 2 rows of columns, each column standing a staggering 60 feet tall, the height of a 6-story building, and carved from single blocks of marble. The entrance would have required a visitor to climb a flight of nearly 24 steps just to reach the floor, each step wider than a person is tall. This was architecture as a deliberate shock to the senses, a deliberate statement that here mortals entered the realm of the divine. And yet, for all its overwhelming presence, the Temple of Apollo at Didyma holds a unique distinction among the world's great ruins. It was a building site for over 600 years. Construction began in the 6th century before Common Era, under the patronage of the wealthy kings of nearby Miletus. Work halted when the Persians sacked the region. It resumed with fervor after Alexander the Great liberated Ionia, only to be paused again by wars and shifting fortunes. The project continued fitfully through the entire Hellenistic period and even into the time of Roman rule. Generation after generation of stonemasons, architects, and laborers came to this site, each adding a column drum, finishing a section of frieze, or carving a new detail on a capital that their grandfathers had put in place. The temple became a perpetual work in progress, a megastructure that outlived the political entities that first dreamed it. The most telling evidence of this endless construction is what is missing. The temple was never roofed. You can stand in its vast central courtyard today, the Aditon where the oracle gave her prophecies, and look straight up at the open sky. Forests of towering columns enclose the space, but they never met across the top. This was not due to a lack of engineering knowledge. The Greeks were master roof builders. It was a matter of sheer, unsustainable scale. The effort required to lift and secure stone beams across such a colossal span, while also completing the endless sculptural decoration, perpetually exceeded the resources and political will of the moment. The temple became a victim of its own grandeur. It was so ambitious that no single era, no single empire, could muster the continuous focus and wealth to see it through to a final, sealed completion. It existed forever in a state of becoming, a monument not to a finished ideal, but to the enduring, frustrating, and ultimately human act of striving itself. The open sky above its sacred court is the perfect symbol for this story, a ceiling that was always just beyond reach, reminding us that some dreams are so vast they can only be pursued, never truly possessed. Even a wonder of the world can carry the quiet mark of the unfinished. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus was no mere tomb. It was a declaration of love and power carved in gleaming marble, a monument so extraordinary it gave its name to all grand tombs that followed. Commissioned by a grieving queen, Artemisia, for her husband Mausolus, it fused Greek artistry with Persian and Egyptian grandeur into a staggering layered masterpiece. A high stone platform supported a colonnade of 36 columns, which in turn held up a 24-step pyramid crowned by a colossal statue of a chariot. Every surface was a battlefield of art, covered with sculpted friezes depicting epic myths and lifelike portraits, a stone encyclopedia of heroism and loss. It was, by all accounts, completed and stood proudly for centuries, surviving earthquakes and invasions until finally succumbing to the medieval need for building stone. Yet, buried within ancient historical accounts is a fascinating hint of incompletion. The Roman author Pliny the Elder, writing centuries later, notes a curious detail. While the structure itself was finished and functional, the elaborate sculptural program, the very soul of the monument, might not have been fully realized according to its original, breathtaking vision. The 4 sides of the mausoleum were assigned to 4 of the greatest sculptors of the age, each a master with his own workshop and distinctive style. One of these was Scopas, a legend known for injecting raw, dramatic emotion into marble. The project was a summit of artistic genius, a collaboration meant to be the definitive masterpiece of its time. But the timeline was merciless. both the patron, Mausolus, and his devoted queen, Artemisia, passed from the world while the monument was still rising. The driving force behind its specific artistic vision was gone. Furthermore, the great Scopas himself, according to some interpretations of the scattered records, may have died or left the project before his section was entirely complete. This creates a profound tension between what is finished and what is fully realized. The mausoleum was absolutely functional. It housed the remains of the king and queen. It awed visitors for generations. It earned its place among the seven wonders. But did it ever truly become the perfectly cohesive, artistically complete monument that was first dreamed? Or was it, in some subtle way, a compilation of magnificent parts, some polished to perfection under the direct gaze of its patrons, and others finished by lesser hands according to the master's plans? This wonder thus poses a haunting question about legacy. Can a megastructure be both complete and unfinished at the same time? It suggests that the most ambitious projects require not just stone and labor, but the sustained life force of the visionary, and when that flame is extinguished, even a world wonder might forever hold within its stones the ghost of a greater, lost possibility. The silence within a royal tomb is one thing, but the quiet of an empty family home is another. Across the rolling hills of central Italy, the Etruscans carved their cities of the dead directly into the soft volcanic rock, creating entire underground neighborhoods known as necropolises. At places like Cerveteri and Tarquinia, you can walk down streets lined not with houses, but with the mounds of tumulus tombs, each one a subterranean replica of a wealthy family's dwelling, complete with carved stone beds, chairs, and even ceilings sculpted to mimic wooden beams. These were not monuments to a single pharaoh, but intimate spaces intended for generations of the same family, a perpetual home for their ancestors. And here we find a different, more haunting kind of interruption. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs where the work was simply abandoned. The chamber is perfectly carved from the living rock, the spaces for sarcophagi are ready, the architectural details are all in place, but the walls remain starkly, uniformly blank. No vibrant frescoes of banquets, no dancing figures, no protective demons. In other cases, a tomb is fully decorated, a masterpiece of color and line, yet the burial niches sit empty, never receiving the individuals for whom this eternal home was so lovingly prepared. This incompletion speaks to a rupture on a human scale. A grand pyramid halts with the death of a king, but a family tomb stops with the end of a lineage. Perhaps a wealthy clan struck by illness or conflict died out entirely, leaving no one to occupy the spaces or to pay the artists to finish the work. Or maybe the entire community was forced to migrate suddenly, fleeing invasion or a natural disaster, abandoning their city of the dead as they sought a new home for the living. There is also the possibility of a quieter, slower change, a shift in religious belief or burial custom that made these elaborate rock-cut tombs seem suddenly outdated. If a new generation adopted simpler rites, the half-finished family vault would become a relic of an old way of thinking, its construction halted by a change of heart rather than a change of fortune. These empty, undecorated rooms are profoundly personal. They are not failed state projects but frozen family plans. They remind us that the forces that stop a megastructure are not always epic and imperial. Sometimes they are as simple and as devastating as a household that never returned, a name that faded from memory, or a tradition that quietly turned to dust, leaving only a clean, carved room in the earth, waiting forever for a life that never came to rest. But perhaps the most humbling force of all was not human, but the very earth beneath our feet. Along the sun-drenched coast of the Bay of Naples, the Romans built with their characteristic confidence, erecting a grand marketplace, or masolum, in the bustling port city of Pozzuoli. Today, we know it as the Tempio di Serapide, named for a statue of the Egyptian god Serapis found there centuries later. At first glance, its ruins are classic Roman grandeur, a rectangular courtyard framed by elegant columns, shops lining the sides, and a graceful central rotunda. But a closer look at three specific columns tells a different, more startling story. These columns are not worn smooth by time alone. Starting from their bases and rising to a uniform height of about 20 feet, they are pockmarked with dozens of small, perfectly round holes. This is the signature of marine mollusks, specifically a clam-like creature called a lithodomus, which bores into submerged stone. The evidence is undeniable and profound. After these columns were partially erected, the entire ground beneath this Roman marketplace sank slowly and inexorably until seawater flooded the site, submerging the lower sections of the building for decades, perhaps centuries. Clams moved in, making their homes in the marble. Then, in a geological reversal, the ground rose again, lifting the columns, the bored holes, and the entire marketplace back out of the sea. This phenomenon is called Bradyseism, a slow, relentless rising and falling of the Earth's crust, driven by the immense volcanic pressures of the Campi Flegrei region. For the Roman builders, this would have been an invisible, unstoppable enemy. Imagine the frustration. You lay the perfect foundations. You begin to raise the majestic columns that will support the roof of a thriving commercial center. And then, season by season, you watch the ground become unstable. The carefully leveled floors tilt. Seawater begins to seep into the worksite, undermining the very stability you are trying to create. The decision to abandon the project at Pozzuoli was not political, economic, or artistic. It was a surrender to a force far greater than any empire. The partially erected columns, frozen in their ascent, stand as a stark monument to human ambition meeting planetary power. They remind us that the ancient world's greatest builders were not just competing with time or rival kingdoms, but were engaged in a constant, silent negotiation with a restless, living planet. The sea can reclaim a marketplace, but a man can also choose to walk away from his own empire. On the rugged Dalmatian coast of modern Croatia, a retired soldier built not just a home, but a fortress for his final years. This is the Palace of Diocletian at Split, a monumental complex that straddles a fascinating line between the complete and the incomplete. It was finished enough to be lived in, grand enough to awe visitors for centuries, yet etched into its very stones are the quiet signs of a dream that was gently set aside. After decades of relentless rule, reforming a crumbling Roman Empire and persecuting the growing Christian faith, Emperor Diocletian did something almost unheard of. In the year 305 of the Common Era, he voluntarily abdicated, trading the purple robes of an emperor for the simple tunic of a private citizen. He retired to this sprawling palace by the sea, a vast rectangle of fortified walls enclosing temples, courtyards, and lavish residential quarters. On the surface, it is a finished masterpiece. But wander its corridors and look closer. You will find columns where the decorative fluting was never fully carved, leaving smooth bands of stone where intricate grooves were meant to be. In some of the grander chambers, the marble veneer on the walls stops abruptly, revealing the rough brickwork beneath, as if the stonemasons simply packed their tools one afternoon and never returned. Most tellingly, certain wings of the palace complex feel less developed, their plans perhaps scaled back from an even more ambitious original vision. This is the legacy of abdication. While Diocletian lived, the palace was an active imperial project, funded by the boundless treasury of Rome and driven by the will of its master. The moment he stepped down, that direct pipeline of imperial urgency and unlimited resource was severed. The palace transformed from a state-funded megastructure into a private, if extraordinarily lavish, residence. The workforce, once comprising the empire's finest artisans, likely dwindled or was redirected to projects for the new emperors. The decorative flourishes, the final polish, the extra wings, these were no longer necessities for a functioning fortress villa. They became optional luxuries for a retired man, and optional luxuries are often the first things left undone. The palace at Split thus offers a profound lesson in graduated completion. It shows us that a building can be both a success and a compromise, a lived-in reality that forever holds the ghost of what it was first imagined to be. The smooth, uncarved columns are not failures. They are silent records of a peaceful ending, proving that sometimes a project is not stopped by disaster, but simply by a change of heart, leaving its grandest ambitions forever resting in the stone, just as the emperor himself chose to rest by the sea. The desire to reach for the sky is a human constant, echoing across every continent. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, the kingdom of Aksum transformed this impulse into stone on a scale that defies belief. Here, in a field of silent giants, lies the clearest case of a civilization's ambition outstripping its own formidable engineering. The Aksumite stelae are not mere markers. They are meticulously carved monoliths, some towering over 100 feet, replicating multi-story buildings in solid granite. They have windows, doors, and false beam ends etched into their sides, as if a palace had been turned to stone and planted upright to honor the elite. Among this forest of stone, one figure lies apart, not standing in pride but resting in colossal defeat. It is known simply as the Great Stela, and it is a monument to a limit that was finally, physically reached. This single piece of rock is breathtaking in its immensity. It measures 108 feet long and is estimated to weigh an incredible 520 tons. If it had been successfully raised, it would have been the largest single stone monument ever erected by human hands anywhere in the ancient world, surpassing even the largest Egyptian obelisks. But it never stood. The evidence written on the stone itself suggests a dramatic and definitive end. The monolith lies where it fell, or where it was deliberately laid after the attempt proved impossible. Crucially, it shows a massive, catastrophic crack near its base, a fracture that likely occurred at the most critical and dangerous moment during the erection process. Imagine the scene. After years of quarrying, shaping, and transporting this behemoth across miles of rugged terrain, the final act begins. Using ramps, ropes, and the coordinated labor of thousands, the Aksumite engineers would have begun to tilt the stone from its horizontal position, pivoting it upward toward the sky. The stresses at the pivot point are unimaginable, and at that moment of maximum tension, the granite itself failed. A deep crack propagated through the base, rendering the monolith structurally unsound and dangerously unstable. To continue would have risked the lives of everyone present and the total destruction of the stone. The project was abandoned, the giant left to sleep on its side. This is technological overreach in its purest form. The Aksumites were master engineers. Their success with slightly smaller stelae proves their profound skill. But the Great Stela represented a leap into an uncharted realm of weight and physics. They pushed their techniques, their logistics, and the very material they worked with to an absolute boundary, and the boundary pushed back. The fallen giant at Aksum is not a symbol of cultural decline or political failure, but of a bold experiment that revealed a hard, physical truth. Some ambitions, carved in stone, can only go so far before the earth itself says no. The fallen giant of Aksum reveals a physical limit, but a political decision can sever a project just as cleanly. Centuries later and a continent away, a different emperor faced a choice that would leave his own legacy divided in stone. The Ming dynasty's founder, the Hongwu Emperor, established his capital at Nanjing and constructed an immense tomb complex nearby, the Ming Xiaoling Mausoleum. It set a majestic standard, a winding spirit path lined with stone animals and officials leading to a vast, man-made hill under which the emperor rested. His son, the Yongle Emperor, initially began his own elaborate tomb within this same southern complex. continuing the tradition of building a permanent seat for the dynasty's power and its ancestors in the fertile Yangtze Valley. The foundations were laid, the grand vision was drafted, and the workforce mobilized. But then, the emperor's gaze turned north. Yongle was a ruler of immense ambition, concerned with securing the empire's borders from Mongol incursions and projecting Ming authority across all of Asia. He made a monumental decision that would reshape Chinese history for centuries. He moved the capital, the entire administrative heart of the empire, along with its court, its treasury, and its most skilled artisans, was relocated over 600 miles north to a rebuilt city we now know as Beijing. This was not a simple change of address. It was a seismic geopolitical shift. The energy of the empire, once focused on perfecting the southern necropolis, was now entirely redirected toward a new project of unimaginable scale: the construction of the Forbidden City, the new imperial palace, and the fortification of the Great Wall. The tomb complex at Nanjing, while still sacred and maintained, effectively became a monument to the dynasty's past. The plans for Yongle's own grand expansion of the site, the additional spirit paths, temples, and subsidiary structures that would have mirrored his father's glory, were quietly set aside. The resources and imperial attention required for such work were now flowing north into the stone and timber of a new capital. The evidence lies in the landscape itself. While the core Ming Xiaoling site is complete and awe-inspiring, archaeological surveys and historical records suggest a more expansive original plan that was never executed. The footprint feels, in certain areas, prepared for more than what was ever built. This creates a powerful contrast between two halves of a single emperor's legacy. In the south, near Nanjing, lies the ghost of his initial vision, a tomb complex forever in a kind of architectural draft form. In the north, in Beijing, stands the overwhelming reality of his final ambition, the Forbidden City, a completed megastructure that declared a new center of the world. One emperor, two capitals, and one clear demonstration that a monument is often abandoned not for lack of will, but because the definition of the empire itself has changed. The unfinished plans at Nanjing are not a failure. They are a shadow cast by the towering success of Beijing, proving that a strategic pivot can leave even an emperor's grave waiting forever for attention that has moved on to build a different dream. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of pyramid rose from the fertile floodplain of the Mississippi River. This was not stone, but earth itself, meticulously basket-loaded by hand over generations. At its peak around the year 1100, the city now called Cahokia was the largest settlement north of Mexico, a bustling metropolis of perhaps 20,000 people. Its central monument, known today as Monk's Mound, is a staggering earthen platform covering 14 acres at its base and rising 100 feet into the air. It is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas, a man-made mountain that served as the sacred and political heart of a vast culture. Yet even this colossal achievement holds clues of a vision that was never fully realized. Archaeologists, by studying the layers of soil and clay, have determined that the mound was not built in one continuous effort. It grew in distinct stages, like chapters in a long book. A new layer of earth would be added, expanding the summit plateau or raising the height, often coinciding with the reign of a new leader or a significant ceremonial event. The most revealing evidence, however, lies in the mound's very shape. The final form we see today is somewhat asymmetrical, with a distinct terrace on the southern side that differs from the cleaner lines of the primary mass. Some researchers interpret this not as a design flaw, but as a sign of an unfinished plan. The archaeological record suggests that the original, grander design for the mound may have called for additional terraces or a more symmetrical, stepped pyramid profile, a vision that was halted before it could be completed. The story of interrupted ambition is echoed in another fascinating feature of Cahokia, its wood henge. just west of the Great Mound, a series of large, circular arrangements of wooden posts were erected. These were not random fences but precise solar calendars, certain posts aligned with the rising sun at the solstices and equinoxes, allowing the community to mark the agricultural and ceremonial year with celestial precision. But here, too, the narrative is one of renewal and then cessation. Evidence shows that these timber circles were not permanent. The posts would rot over time, and the circle would be meticulously rebuilt, often in a slightly different location or configuration. This cycle of rebuilding speaks to a living, active tradition. Then, at a certain point in the 13th century, the cycle stopped. The last woodhenge was erected, used, and then never replaced. The posts decayed, and no new circle took its place. This silence in the archaeological record is profoundly telling. The abandonment of both the grand architectural plans for Monk's Mound and the celestial calendar of the Woodhenge point, not to a single catastrophe, but to a slow, pervasive unraveling. Scholars point to a combination of factors that may have stretched this sophisticated society to its limit. Decades of heavy logging to build palisades and houses could have led to deforestation and soil erosion. A shift in climate patterns might have caused unpredictable floods or droughts, destabilizing the corn-based agriculture that fed the city. As resources grew strained and the social contract frayed, the immense communal labor required to move millions of baskets of earth for the next phase of the mound, or to haul and erect giant new cedar posts for the henge, may have become impossible to muster. The people of Cahokia did not vanish, but they likely dispersed, reorganizing into smaller communities across the region. The Great Mound was left in its current, asymmetrical form, a testament to a pinnacle reached and then gently, gradually relinquished as the energy of a civilization slowly turned inward, leaving its greatest monuments to bear the quiet weight of an altered future. The silence in the jungle is not an emptiness but a presence. In the heart of the ancient Maya city of Tikal, a pyramid known as Temple 5 stands as a perfect, poignant example of work left in its final hour. Its core structure is complete, a steep and imposing mass of limestone that once dominated the Grand Plaza. Yet, to an archaeologist's eye, it is forever caught in the last stage of dressing. The smooth, gleaming plaster coating that would have made the pyramid shine white under the tropical sun was never fully applied. The elaborate decorative capstone or roof comb that would have crowned its summit and been painted with vibrant portraits of gods and kings was never installed. This is not a project slowly winding down. It is a machine switched off mid-cycle, the tools set down with the expectation they would be picked up again tomorrow, a tomorrow that never arrived. Temple 5's abrupt halt is a single, frozen moment within a far greater and more prolonged silence. Across the Maya world of the classic period, from the 8th to the 10th centuries, a slow-motion termination was unfolding. In city-state after city-state, places like Palenque, Kapan, and Calakmul, the carving of ornate stone stelae celebrating royal victories began to cease. The grand ball courts fell quiet. Most tellingly, the ambitious cycles of pyramid construction and expansion, where each new ruler would add a layer over his predecessor's tomb, gradually stopped. The last dated monument in the long count calendar was erected, and then no more followed. This was not a single, catastrophic event like an invasion, but a gradual dimming of the cultural lights. The causes form a complex and intertwined web, a perfect storm of pressures that overwhelmed a brilliant but fragile system. Decades of intense population growth likely pushed the agricultural limits of the jungle, even with sophisticated terrace and canal systems. Prolonged periods of drought, revealed in studies of lakebed sediments, would have strained water supplies and led to crop failures, creating hardship for the common people who fed the cities. This environmental stress was magnified by intense political rivalry. Constant warfare between competing city-states, drained resources, and destabilized trade networks that brought in essential goods like obsidian for tools and salt for preservation. The ruling elite, whose divine authority was tied to their ability to ensure prosperity and cosmic order, may have faced a crisis of belief as those conditions faltered. Temple 5, therefore, is more than an unfinished building. It is a threshold. Its bare stone represents the precise point where the collective energy of a civilization, the labor, the artistry, the religious fervor, and the royal command, could no longer sustain the monumental vision that defined it. The workers walked away from the plaster mix and the uncarved capstone not because they lost the skill, but because the social and environmental contract that made such a project possible had quietly unraveled. The jungle did not conquer the Maya. Rather, the people made a collective, gradual decision to turn away from the grand stone centers, dispersing into smaller, more sustainable communities. The unfinished temple stands as their last collective statement, a testament not to a sudden death, but to a profoundly difficult and ultimately transformative choice to build a different future. The most direct threat to a monument was never the weather, but the throne. Across the ancient world, the rise and fall of rulers was the heartbeat of history, and when that rhythm faltered, the stones fell silent. Political upheaval did not merely delay a project, it could sever its lifeline in an instant, cutting off the royal will and the river of gold that made the impossible seem within reach. This was the first and most decisive category of abandonment. Consider the evidence we have already encountered. In the sands of Abusir, Pharaoh Neferefre's truncated pyramid stands as a testament to dynastic failure. His unexpectedly brief reign meant the state machinery, calibrated for a king's lifetime of construction, simply had no protocol for completion. The successor, facing the immense cost, made a coldly pragmatic choice to redirect all resources toward his own eternal home, leaving his predecessor's monument forever in its foundational state. The project died not with the pharaoh, but with his political utility. In the cliffs of Deir el-Bahri, we saw a more active and ideological termination. Hatshepsut's magnificent temple was a bold declaration of female power, a statement that challenged the very order of kingship. Her stepson Thutmose III, upon securing sole power, did not just halt further construction, he launched a systematic campaign to erase her memory. The unfinished portions of her complex became physical evidence of a new political truth, a conscious rewriting of history where the chisel became a weapon of Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Here, incompletion was a deliberate political act, a way to dismantle a legacy by leaving its physical form intentionally fractured. The story shifts from Egypt to the hills of Vergina, where ambition was not erased but redirected by an act of violence. King Philip II's grand palace at Aigai, meant to be the new heart of Macedon, was frozen near completion by a single public assassination. His death did more than create a power vacuum. It unleashed a new kind of ambition in his son, Alexander. The resources, artisans, and treasury that would have finished a splendid home were instantly funneled into an endless campaign of conquest. The palace was abandoned not for lack of funds or skill, but because the very definition of imperial greatness had been violently redefined overnight, shifting from building a permanent center to pursuing perpetual motion. Centuries later, the palace of Diocletian at Split shows us a quieter but no less definitive political end: voluntary abdication. The moment Diocletian stepped down, the project transformed. It ceased to be an active, state-funded imperial megastructure and became a private, if lavish, retirement villa. The uncarved columns and unfinished veneers are not signs of poverty or invasion, but of a severed pipeline. The unlimited resources and urgent imperial will were gone, redirected to the courts of new emperors. The decorative flourishes, once necessities, became optional luxuries for a retired man and were left as gentle reminders of a dream scaled back by choice. In each of these cases, from sudden death to systematic erasure to peaceful retirement, the pattern is unmistakable. These monuments were extensions of a single individual's authority, legitimacy, and divine mandate. They were not public works in a modern sense, they were colossal projections of personal power. When that person fell from power, whether by knife, by decree, or by their own hand, the projection often flickered and died with them. The political engine that fueled decades of labor could be switched off in a day, leaving the stones to tell a story not of engineering failure, but of the profound and perpetual fragility of human authority. Yet political will is a flame that can only burn while the fuel lasts. A second, more pervasive force could bleed a megastructure to a standstill, not with a sudden blow, but through a slow, relentless draining of the very lifeblood of a civilization, its economy and resources. This was not the drama of an assassination or a damnation, but the quiet tragedy of a treasury running dry, of harvests failing, and of a society discovering the hard limits of its own abundance. The evidence for this is written not in defaced statues, but in the subtle, collective sigh of a workforce that could no longer be fed or paid. Look at the Pyramids of Meroe in Nubia, where the later structures grew smaller, their cores filled with rubble instead of finely fitted stone. This was not a loss of knowledge or piety, but a clear signal of economization. The kingdom's wealth, derived from iron production and control of trade routes, may have faced new pressures. Perhaps rival powers disrupted commerce, or local resources became harder to extract. The grand tradition of pyramid building continued, but in a scaled-down, less labor-intensive form, as if the kingdom was trying to maintain the appearance of power even as its material foundation was subtly shifting. It was completion by compromise, a megastructure finished but forever bearing the marks of a tightened budget. This slow fade finds its starkest expression in the great Maya cities. When you stand before Temple 5 at Tikal with its unplastered surface, you are looking at the endpoint of a complex economic and environmental chain. Decades of population growth pushed the jungle's agricultural capacity. Then, prolonged periods of drought, verified by studies of ancient lakebeds, would have led to repeated crop failures. A ruler's divine authority was tied directly to his ability to ensure rain and abundance. Consecutive droughts would have shattered that covenant. Meanwhile, constant warfare between city-states drained manpower and disrupted the trade networks that brought in essential goods like obsidian for tools and salt for preservation. The result was a society under multiple, simultaneous strains. The labor force needed to haul plaster for the temple or to carve its decorative capstone was likely needed more urgently in the fields, or was simply too malnourished and demoralized to continue the sacred work. The project halted because the entire economic and social system that justified it and funded it had quietly unraveled. Even the mighty Egyptians were not immune to this gradual erosion. Recall the Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak with its columns in 3 states of finish, fully carved, merely painted with outlines, and completely blank. This is a perfect archaeological clock of economic and administrative energy. The fully carved columns represent the peak of imperial wealth and centralized control, when the state could afford to keep armies of master sculptors at work for generations. The painted columns show the moment that control began to waver. The plans were still grand, but the resources to execute them in stone were becoming scarce. The blank columns are the final admission, the administrative machinery, the grain stores to feed the artisans, the gold to pay for their tools, had been redirected or had simply evaporated. The work slowed from a flood to a trickle to a stop, not by decree but by the silent arithmetic of depletion. This category of collapse reveals a humbling truth about the ancient world's greatest achievements. They existed in a precarious balance. A megastructure was a massive, ongoing transaction, paid for with agricultural surplus, mined wealth, and the loyalty of thousands. If the harvest failed for a few seasons, if a crucial copper mine played out, or if a distant conflict severed a lucrative trade route, that transaction could no longer be sustained. The workers would drift back to their farms, the quarries would grow quiet, and the project would enter a state of suspended animation, waiting for a prosperity that might never return. The stones were left not in rebellion or protest, but because the civilization itself had run out of breath, leaving its grandest dream to wait in silence for an economic spring that would never come. The third force was neither political nor economic, but a confrontation with a physical reality. Ancient builders possessed a deep, hard-won understanding of their materials, but sometimes their ambition raced ahead of that understanding, leading to a moment of irreversible, catastrophic failure. This is the category of technological overreach, where a project was not slowly abandoned but decisively broken, often by a single flaw that revealed the outer boundary of what was possible. The Unfinished Obelisk in Aswan is the textbook example. Imagine the meticulous, years-long process of carving that 1,200-ton giant from the living granite, only for a hidden weakness in the stone to announce itself with a devastating crack at the final hour. That fracture was more than a defect, it was a verdict. The obelisk was too immense, its value too singular, to simply patch or work around. The effort required to quarry another monolith of that scale was likely seen as insurmountable after such a demoralizing setback. The project died not for lack of will or wealth, but because the material world itself delivered a definitive no. A similar, even more dramatic story is told by the Great Stela of Aksum. That fallen 520-ton giant represents the absolute frontier of an engineering tradition. The Aksumites had successfully erected slightly smaller stelae, mastering the incredible logistics of moving and raising multi-story stone towers. But the Great Stela was a leap into uncharted territory of weight and stress. The catastrophic crack near its base, which likely occurred during the perilous tilting process of erection, was a physics lesson written in granite. It demonstrated that their techniques, however advanced, had met an immovable limit. To continue would have risked total destruction of the stone and the lives of the workers. This kind of failure is uniquely final. A political project can be revived by a new ruler. An economic one can resume after a good harvest, but a megastructure broken by its own ambition carries the mark of that ambition's limit forever. It becomes a monument to a threshold crossed, a permanent reminder that the ancient world's greatest builders were not just artists and organizers, but also experimenters, pushing their technology until the stone itself pushed back, leaving their grandest dreams resting forever on the ground, a testament to the courage to attempt the impossible and the humility required to accept when it truly was. The fourth force was neither king nor kingdom, but the ground they stood upon. While political and economic pressures were born of human society, environmental and geological shifts represented a confrontation with a planet that was never truly still, an active and unpredictable participant that could render even the most sacred site untenable. We have already witnessed this in the submerged columns of Pozzuoli's Tempio di Serapide, where the slow, breathing rise and fall of the earth Bradyseism turned a Roman marketplace into a seabed and back again, halting construction not by human decree but by planetary rhythm. This was not an isolated phenomenon. Across the ancient world, the stability of the environment was the silent, non-negotiable foundation for every grand endeavor. Consider the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization, the Nile. Its annual flood was a predictable source of fertility, but a drastic, permanent shift in its course or a series of catastrophic floods could have severed the logistical arteries of a megastructure. The quarries at Aswan, which supplied the granite for obelisks and colossi, depended on the river for transport. If the Nile's behavior changed, making certain channels impassable or flooding the quarry works for years on end, the entire supply chain for a nation's monuments could be cut off at the source. The stones would remain in the earth not for lack of will, but because the waterway that was their road had literally turned away. On the other side of the environmental spectrum lay the slow, suffocating pressure of drought. We have seen its potential role in the Maya dispersion and at Cahokia. A prolonged period of diminished rains was not merely a bad season, it was a systemic crisis. For the Maya, decades of drier conditions, as recorded in lake sediments and stalagmites, would have strained the intricate water management systems that supported dense urban populations. A society focused on survival cannot also focus on moving millions of cubic feet of earth for a temple platform. The choice becomes stark, and the ceremonial centers with their half-plastered pyramids are gradually deprioritized. At Cahokia, similar climate pressures on maize agriculture could have eroded the social cohesion needed to muster the labor for the next phase of Monk's Mound. When the weather patterns shift for generations, the very contract between a people and their land is rewritten, and the energy for monumental building evaporates like water from a parched field. Then there is the sudden, violent agency of the earth itself, seismic activity. An earthquake does not just crack walls, it can shatter the confidence of an age. While evidence is often buried or rebuilt over, we can ponder its potential role. A major tremor during construction could collapse ramps, bury workshops, and kill skilled laborers in an instant. More subtly, it could destabilize the chosen foundation of a building, revealing hidden faults or liquefying the ground, forcing engineers to confront a terrifying reality that the very earth beneath their masterpiece was fundamentally unreliable. In such a scenario, a project might be abandoned not because it was damaged, but because the site itself was deemed cursed or geologically doomed. This category of cause reframes our understanding of these ancient builders. They were not just competing with time or rival states, but were engaged in a constant, delicate negotiation with a dynamic planet. A change in a river's path, a centuries-long drought, or a trembling of the crust were forces no army could defeat and no treasury could bribe. These environmental shifts acted as the ultimate veto power, overruling human ambition by altering the basic rules of the game. The unfinished structures they left behind are therefore more than historical puzzles. They are stone diaries recording a dialogue between civilization and nature, a dialogue that sometimes ended with humanity respectfully or reluctantly setting down its tools. But perhaps the most profound and subtle force of all was not a material shortage or a fallen king, but a change of heart. The fifth and final category of abandonment is religious and cultural transformation, where the very purpose of a megastructure evaporates, leaving its stones perfectly intact but spiritually empty. This is not about a lack of resources, but a loss of meaning, a moment when a society's deepest beliefs shift, and the monuments of the old ways are left behind like outgrown shells. Recall the silent, undecorated Etruscan tombs carved with such care but never used. This haunting emptiness may not signal a family's demise, but a change in their beliefs. Perhaps over generations, the elaborate practice of recreating entire homes for the afterlife began to feel less vital. New philosophical ideas from Greece or Rome might have introduced simpler concepts of the soul, making the costly, time-consuming rock-cut tombs seem like an unnecessary grandeur. The tomb itself was ready, but the cultural imperative to use it had quietly faded away. The work stopped because the tradition that demanded it was no longer the beating heart of the community. We can sense a similar, grander shift in the air at places like Karnak. The Great Hypostyle Hall, with its blank columns, could tell a story of economic strain, but it may also whisper of a changing religious landscape. The temple complex at Karnak was dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, the king of the gods during Egypt's imperial zenith, but Egyptian religion was not static. The rise and fall of deities' importance was tied to politics, to foreign influence, and to the spiritual needs of the people. As centuries passed, the cult of Amun-Ra, while never disappearing, may have seen its central, all-consuming role challenged. A pharaoh more devoted to Osiris or Ptah might divert royal patronage to their temples elsewhere. The theological focus of the kingdom could subtly drift. When that happens, the drive to complete every last inch of carving in a temple dedicated to a slightly less dominant god can dissipate. The project becomes less urgent, not because the stones are too heavy, but because the prayers have found a new home. This idea finds its purest expression at Didyma. The Temple of Apollo. There was a project for the ages, but its 600-year construction period spanned immense cultural upheaval. It began in the world of Greek city-states, was continued under Hellenistic kings, and saw work under Roman emperors. Each era brought its own religious syncretism and priorities. The fervent belief in the oracle that justified such a colossal building in the 4th century before Common Era was not the same as the more administrative, state-sponsored religion of the 2nd century of the Common Era. The will to complete the temple relied on a continuous, unwavering belief in its central, divine necessity. If that certainty wavered, if the oracle's political influence waned, or if the god Apollo himself became just one figure in a crowded Roman pantheon, then the Herculean effort to roof the unroofable could simply cease to make sense. The purpose had diluted over time, leaving the greatest ambition perpetually unfinished. This category reveals a powerful truth about these ancient stones. They were not just physical challenges, they were acts of faith. A pyramid was a resurrection machine, a tomb was an eternal home, a temple was a literal house for a god. Their construction was an act of devotion as much as an act of engineering. Therefore, when the devotion changed course, when a new set of beliefs began to guide the community, the old projects could lose their sacred momentum. Workers might still be available, funds might still exist, but the compelling why, the cultural and spiritual engine, had gone silent. The monument was left not in ruin, but in a kind of respectful obsolescence, a fossil of a former belief, forever waiting for a faith that had evolved into something new. A society that builds for eternity makes a profound gamble with its present. The true danger of a megastructure was not the physical challenge of moving stone, but the way it transformed an entire civilization into a single, precarious system. This was not just architecture, it was a concentration of risk. By committing to a project of such immense scale, a kingdom would funnel its greatest resources, its food surplus, its skilled labor, its precious metals, its administrative focus into one narrow channel for decades. This created a profound vulnerability. The society became like a body with all its blood flowing to a single limb. If that limb was injured, the whole system went into shock. The unfinished monuments we have explored are therefore far more than abandoned construction sites. They are forensic evidence, precise indicators showing us the exact point where a civilization's complex web of support finally snapped. Consider the requirements for success. A mega-project demanded not just wealth but predictable, long-term stability. It required a ruling class secure enough in its power to plan not for the next harvest but for the next generation. It needed an agricultural system so robust it could feed thousands of non-farming specialists year after year. It depended on trade routes remaining open to bring rare materials, and on a religious or ideological belief so strong it could justify the staggering cost to the population. This was a delicate, interconnected machine. The moment any one of these gears began to slip, a poor harvest, a contested succession, a new religious idea, a shift in a river's course, the strain would transmit directly to the building site. The workers would be the first to feel it as rations dwindled or pay failed to arrive. The slowdown would begin not with a royal decree, but with a quiet, growing absence at the quarry face. Most critically, these projects were often inextricably tied to the legitimacy of a single individual, a pharaoh, an emperor, a divine king. The monument was their promise of eternal order made physical. This fused the fate of the building to the political survival of its patron in a dangerously direct way. When Pharaoh Neferefre died young, his pyramid lost its reason for being because the state's purpose was to serve the living king, not perfect the tomb of a dead one. When Hatshepsut's reign was retroactively condemned, her temple complex became a liability to be erased, not an asset to be finished. The project was not a separate entity, it was an extension of the ruler's body politic. Any threat to the ruler was by design a threat to the stones being laid in their name. This systemic vulnerability explains why the causes of abandonment so often intertwine. A drought and environmental pressure might not collapse a society on its own. But when that drought strikes a civilization that has committed half its grain supply to feeding pyramid builders, the crisis is magnified tenfold. The economic strain leads to social unrest, which undermines the ruler's legitimacy, which halts the project, which throws the specialized workforce into disarray, further crippling the economy. The megastructure, designed as a symbol of unshakable power, could ironically become the very pivot point around which instability turned into collapse. The silent building site is then the clearest signal, the canary in the coal mine that tells us the entire ecosystem that created it was under fatal stress. These unfinished dreams are therefore history's most honest storytellers. They do not boast of glory but confess to fragility. They show us that ancient civilizations understood the concept of putting all their eggs in one basket, and they also, tragically, discovered what happens when that basket falls. Yet against this landscape of interrupted dreams, other monuments did reach for the sky and touch it. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands not as a mystery of abandonment, but as a testament to completion. The Parthenon crowned the Athenian Acropolis, and the Colosseum opened its gates to roaring crowds. These icons achieved what so many others could not. What was different? Their stories reveal the rare and fragile recipe for success in the ancient world, a convergence of factors that allowed ambition to be fully realized. First, consider longevity and stability of leadership. The Great Pyramid is attributed to Pharaoh Khufu, whose reign is believed to have lasted over 2 decades, perhaps even longer. This provided a consistent, unwavering source of royal will and direction for a project that would span his entire rule and beyond. There were no succession crises to divert resources midstream, no sudden power vacuum to freeze the worksite. The political engine hummed steadily for a generation. Similarly, the Parthenon was built under the sustained vision of Pericles during Athens' Golden Age, a period of democratic stability and imperial wealth that lasted long enough to see the complex artistic and engineering program through to its breathtaking end. Second, these successes relied on exceptionally robust and resilient economic models. The Colosseum was funded by the immense spoils from the Jewish-Roman conflict, a vast, one-time infusion of wealth into the Roman treasury under Emperor Vespasian. This created a financial buffer, allowing construction to proceed without competing against other immediate drains on the state coffers. The Egyptian pyramid builders operated a command economy of breathtaking efficiency, with state-controlled agriculture, mining, and labor distribution that could sustain a permanent, specialized workforce for generations. Their economic machine was built for this single purpose. Third, and perhaps most subtly, these completed wonders often benefited from a pragmatic, incremental approach to ambition. The Colosseum's design, while revolutionary, utilized concrete, a flexible, forgiving material that allowed for rapid construction and on-the-fly engineering adjustments. The Parthenon, for all its perfection, was built upon the foundations of an earlier temple destroyed by the Persians, incorporating existing infrastructure and a clear, inherited sacred site. Even the Great Pyramid, the absolute peak of scale, may represent a culmination of centuries of prior experimentation with tomb design at Saqqara and Dosha. Each step was a lesson learned, a technique refined. This contrasts sharply with projects like the Great Stela of Aksum or the Temple at Didyma, which represented radical, unprecedented leaps in scale or complexity that left no room for error or adaptation. When the crack appeared in the Aksumite monolith, there was no smaller version to fall back on, no way to scale down the dream. The completed megastructures show us that success was not merely about having a grand vision, but about having the stable platform, the deep reserves, and the practical wisdom to build that vision one manageable, achievable step at a time. They are the exceptions that prove the rule, highlighting just how precarious the entire endeavor truly was. A silent building site is a riddle waiting to be solved. For an archaeologist, the ruins of an unfinished megastructure present a unique and delicate challenge. It is not simply a matter of studying what is there, but of learning to read what is not there. The evidence they seek is often negative, a ghostly imprint of work that was planned but never executed. A missing capstone on a pyramid summit is not just an absence, it is a statement. It tells the researcher that the builders stopped before the final, crowning act. Unused quarrying trenches, cut with precision around a block that was never freed, mark the exact moment the hammers fell silent. A vast wall space left blank in a temple, while its neighbors are covered in intricate carvings, speaks of a slowdown, a shift in priorities, or a final surrender. This negative evidence is fragile. Time and the elements are not neutral, they are active editors. A wall that appears unfinished to us might simply be one that has been stripped by later generations for its valuable stone. A foundation that seems hastily laid might have been damaged by an earthquake centuries after it was abandoned. The archaeologist's first task, then, is one of forensic distinction. They must separate the marks of deliberate, ancient abandonment from the scars of subsequent ruin. They look for tools left in place, for stockpiles of unused materials still neatly stacked, for construction ramps that were never dismantled. These are the signs of a project frozen in progress, not one that was completed and later fell down. It is a painstaking process of listening to a silence, of discerning the difference between a sentence left deliberately unfinished and one that has been partially erased by time. Every empty space, every uncarved surface, becomes a clue in understanding not just how the builders worked, but why they stopped. The story is not in the grand facade that still stands, but in the delicate, telling emptiness where the next stone was meant to go. A broken promise in stone can speak more eloquently than a perfect one. This is the profound legacy of the unfinished. While the Great Pyramid is a closed book, a completed masterpiece whose construction secrets are locked within its flawless form, the Unfinished Obelisk is an open workshop. Its very abandonment is what makes it so priceless to history. The tool marks are still visible on the granite, showing the exact size and shape of the pounders used. The trenches cut around it reveal the step-by-step quarrying process, frozen in time. The fatal crack tells us not just of a mistake, but of the immense risk these builders took with every single colossal block. A finished monument hides its struggles, but an unfinished one confesses them, offering archaeologists a direct line to the methods, the materials, and the very moment of crisis that reshaped a kingdom's plans. There is an undeniable irony here. These so-called failures, these symbols of interrupted ambition, often grant us a clearer, more honest window into the ancient world than their successful counterparts ever could. A completed temple, painted and polished for centuries of worship, has its rough drafts erased, but a site like the workers' village at Giza or the half-carved columns at Karnak show us the human reality behind the glory, the logistics, the compromises, the sheer scale of the effort before the final coat of whitewash was applied. They are snapshots, not portraits, capturing the sweat and problem-solving that official histories often smoothed over. Beyond their technical lessons, these places accumulate new meaning with each passing era. They become powerful symbols, their original purpose transformed by time. The unfinished obelisk, left in its Aswan quarry for millennia, is no longer just a pharaoh's failed project. Today, it is a museum piece in its own right, visited by thousands who come not to see a completed wonder, but to stand in awe of the attempt itself. It has become a monument to human ambition and to the humbling limits of that ambition, a duality that a perfect pyramid cannot convey. Similarly, the skeletal remains of a castle left incomplete by war can become a symbol of a conflict's futility, while the ruins of a never-occupied family tomb speak to the quiet tragedies of lineage and loss. These sites are palimpsests, their original blueprints overwritten by the meanings we project onto them, lessons about hubris, about resilience, or about the fleeting nature of power. Ultimately, these silent building sites ask us to redefine what we consider a historical treasure. Is value found only in completion, in the triumphant finale? Or is there a deeper wisdom in the struggle, in the blueprint, in the moment everything changed? The unfinished megastructures of antiquity remind us that history is not a parade of polished victories. It is a record of attempts, of calculations, of societies reaching for a vision and sometimes, for reasons profound or petty, having to let it go. In their frozen state, they hold a truth that finished monuments often conceal, that the journey, with all its risks and uncertainties, is where we truly see a civilization's character, forever captured in the stones they left, waiting for a tomorrow that never came. These silent stones are not dead ends, but conversations frozen in time. We have wandered through their quiet spaces, from the cracked obelisk in Aswan to the unplastered pyramid at Tikal, and a single, unifying truth emerges. These unfinished megastructures are among our most profound historical documents. Their stillness tells a dynamic story. It is the story of overreach, where ambition dared to touch a physical or economic limit and found it unyielding. It is the story of change, where a new belief, a new ruler, or a new climate quietly rewrote a society's priorities. And above all, it is the story of contingency, the humbling reminder that the grandest plans of kings and empires were always at the mercy of 1,000 unpredictable forces, a hidden flaw in the rock, a succession crisis, a shift in the river's path. When we look at the ancient world, we naturally marvel at its wonders, at the pyramids and temples that stand complete against the sky. They speak of power achieved. But these fragments, these half-built dreams, speak of the struggle itself. They show us the scaffolding, the gamble, the fragile human system behind the stone. In that sense, they offer a more intimate and perhaps more instructive connection to the past. They do not show us a civilization at its peak, posing for history, but a civilization in motion, caught in the act of striving, adapting, and sometimes letting go. This perspective does not diminish their achievements, it deepens our understanding of them. It asks us to listen to the pauses in history's song, and it invites a final, reflective question for our own age. We live in an era of our own colossal undertakings, space elevators, sea-spanning bridges, cities built on artificial islands. What unseen forces might one day bring our own grandest projects to a sudden, silent halt? Will it be a hidden flaw in our calculations, a slow shift in our collective priorities, or a planetary change we failed to anticipate? The stones of antiquity have no answers for our future, but they offer a timeless lesson in humility. They remind us that every monument, no matter how mighty, begins as a dream balanced on the edge of possibility, waiting to see if the world will allow it to be finished.